We're going to finish up chapter 28 today with our second half of Echinoderms. So remember, these are starfish, our sea urchins, and things like that. So we're going to get on with our first portion. We're going to talk about how they can respond to different things in the environment. So Echinoderms respond because they have a nerve ring that will surround their mouth, and then there's nerves, radial nerves, that connect the ring with the different body sections. So again, when we think of this group, there's a lot of radial arms would be just like the starfish, the 5 arms that extend out, and so there's nerves going to each one of those body sections. And also, most echinoderms will have some more scattered sensory cells that will detect light, gravity, and the chemicals that are released by potential prey items. So they don't have a brain, we said that earlier. However, they do have quite a bit of cells to help them detect different things, so they can respond to the environment in a very effective way, just in a different way than what we think of, because they don't technically have a brain. So that's the response of this group. Next one is movement. Remember, we mentioned the tube feet in our last video. So most echinoderms will move using those tube feet. And there's sand dollars and sea urchins. Again, both of those are examples of echinoderms. They have movable spines that are attached to their endoskeleton. So they have spines that are connected from the inside of their body that go out to help them move. And then sea stars and brittle stars will use their arms for locomotion. And sea cucumbers will crawl by using both tube feet and the muscles of their body wall. So a lot of it, again, is the tube feet, and then with their arms for their extensions used for movement. And for reproduction, all echinoderms are reproduced by external fertilization. And so how this happens is the sperm and the egg are released into open water, and then that's where fertilization takes place. So the sperm comes into contact with the egg outside of the echinoderm's body, and then the larva will swim around for some time, and then the larva will swim to the ocean bottom, and then there they will develop into adults. And so now we've gotten all the basics on what makes an echinoderm an echinoderm. So now we're going to look at what are the different classes of echinoderms. So the classes include, the first one would be sea urchins and sand dollars. That's one class. Then the brittle stars make up another one. Sea cucumbers make up in the next, followed by sea stars, and then the last one being a group of organisms that are called sea lilies and feather stars. So you guys will, hopefully almost everyone took a look at some of those in our echinoderm poster activity. But our first one are the sea urchins and the sand dollars, and they are just kind of characterized by having large solid plates that form a box around their internal organs, and many of them are detrivores, are grazers that eat large quantities of algae. So we mentioned this before with the jaw of the sea urchins, how they have just a scraping jaw to go along the bottom to eat algae. And then sand dollars will often burrow under layers of sand or mud to protect themselves, and then some sea urchins will wedge themselves into rock crevices during the day. So they kind of like to keep a low profile. They don't necessarily like to just be out all the time, because again, they're just grazers. They're not really fierce predators or anything like that. And so our next one are brittle stars, and these are common in many parts of the sea, especially on the coral reefs, and they're filter feeders and detrivores, again just kind of feeding on dead things or anything that passes next to them. And kind of a characteristic of this group, they do look like what we call the starfish, but their arms are a lot more slender and a lot more flexible, and they actually can shed one or more of these arms when they are attacked. And this detached arm will keep moving, and it'll distract the predator while the brittle star is able to escape. So it's almost like some lizards around here can lose their tail. These brittle stars can actually drop on one of their arms, then they can escape, and then they can actually regrow back that arm. So pretty interesting adaptation there that helps them survive. And the sea cucumber. So most sea cucumbers, again, are detritus feeders. Again, they just eat on dead things. And so what they do is they just roam across the deep sea ocean floor, and they just suck up anything that's dead, whether it's any type of organic matter or the remains of other animals and plants. And the reason they get their name, it's pretty self-explanatory, because they look basically like a moving pickle that you would eat, or a cucumber. So basically, that's why they got their name, because that's literally what they look like, except they can move. And so our next one is a sea star. This is probably the most famous example of this group. Most in this group are carnivorous, preying on bivalves. So again, they eat the things like the clams and the mussels and the oysters. We talked about how they ate in class, how they basically puke up their stomach. And a very interesting thing about this group, that if you pull a sea star into multiple different pieces, each piece will grow into a completely new animal as long as it contains a portion of the central part of the body. So as long as you could rip one into 5 different pieces, each individual 5 legs, as long as each piece contains a part of the central body, it will grow back into another new organism. And then they can move by creeping slowly across the ocean floor. So they're not very quick, but they are actually going to be a fierce predator, which we'll see here in a second. And so our last group are sea lilies and feather stars, and they're common in tropical oceans. And many of the modern feather stars will live on coral reefs where they perch on top of rocks, and they use their tube feet to catch floating plankton. And so that's it for our different groups. So to finish up this chapter, we're going to look at how these echinoderms relate to everyone around them, so the ecology of the echinoderms. So they're important because a sudden rise or fall in the number of echinoderms can cause major changes to populations of other marine organisms. And one example that they give is that sea urchins help control the distribution of algae and other forms of marine life. So if we lost our sea urchins, algae would take over and would probably displace some other organisms, and it would just grow out of control. So sea urchins help keep algae under control and just kind of help keep the natural balance. And then another one is that sea stars, they're important predators that help control the number of other organisms. And one example is that there's a crown of thorns sea star or crown of thorns starfish, and it destroys actually extensive areas of coral reef in the Great Barrier Reef of Australia. So that's one that actually is a problem, to whereas the first blank kind of refers to more of a positive there, to where it can control the number of organisms, where this sea star is destroying big portions of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. So that's it for chapter 28. Let me know if you have any questions.